Hello and welcome to Literary Prospects. I'm Kelly Vick, your host, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest. Olesya Salnikova Gilmore is the author of The Witch and the Tsar and The Haunting of Moscow House. Her latest novel, The Fortune Tellers of Rue Daru, is out now. Originally from Moscow, Olesya was raised in the U.S. and graduated from Pepperdine University with a BA in English and Political Science, and from Northwestern School of Law with a JD. She practiced litigation at a large firm in Chicago for several years before pursuing her dream of becoming an author. Olesya writes speculative gothic suspense and other dark fiction, and she loves exploring Eastern European history and folklore. Her work has appeared in LitHub, Tour.com, Crime Reads, Writer's Digest, and Washington Independent Review of Books, among others. She lives in a wooded lakeside suburb of Chicago with her husband and 2 daughters. Olesya Salnikova Gilmore, thank you so much for being here to discuss your enchanting new novel, The Fortune Tellers of Rue Daru. In a starred review, Booklist says, an ingenious literary magician, Gilmore effectively and elegantly conjures up Paris in the 1920s and its Russian immigrant community, adding to her addictively readable Gothic tale a dash of romance and a generous splash of spooky supernaturalism. Author Madeline Martin says, The Fortune Tellers of Rue Daru is a spine-tingling Gothic tale of family, a legacy of secrets, and the dangerous cost of unearthing the past through a forbidden seance. A haunting and compelling story that is sure to grip readers. Author Marina Scott says Salnikova Gilmore's writing soars, dazzling readers with unforgettable scenery and achingly beautiful prose. This thrilling story of murder, generational power of love, and treachery will be devoured in one sitting. And author Megan Chance says a haunting, captivating Gothic novel that will keep readers tight in its grip until the very last page. So, with that, welcome. And what can you tell us about your new book? How do you describe The Fortune Tellers of Rue Daru?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on the show. Um, so this novel is Gothic suspense. It's a multi-generational tale, and it's about a fortune teller, a young woman in jazz age 1920s Paris. And she must really delve into her family's mysterious, secret, dark past when an exiled Romanov princess and her brother come to her looking for their father, who's actually dead. So they would like her to find him in the beyond. And she does summon him. She does a seance. To her surprise, he is much more vengeful than she thought. And he not only starts to haunt the tea room she lives in with her grandmother, but also to whisper about the secret, kind of mysterious way that her mother died 20 years before. So it's really kind of a coming of age tale about Zina, that's the young fortune teller, the main character in my novel. And it's about kind of her finding herself, her power, as well as her as a woman, as well as just kind of a supernatural horror mystery with some romance. But I think at its core, it's about women surviving in immigration. I'm an immigrant, and so I was very inspired by some of the stories of the Russian emigre community in Paris and just how the past from the old country can really haunt you as you move on to a new country and a new life. And I think at its core, that's what the book is about.
What was the spark that started this particular story, got this going for you?
Actually, I really wanted to learn more about fortune telling. I kept seeing fortune telling in its many ways throughout my research into Slavic like folklore, and magic and superstitions that I studied for my previous 2 books. And it just kept coming up. And I actually had a character that was a fortune teller in my previous book, The Haunting of Moscow House, also a Gothic suspense. And so I was just, my appetite was very, was whetted, learning about fortune telling for that, the research for that character. And as I started to research, I actually learned that the women of my family did some fortune telling, which was really surprising to me because I never really connected the dots. They never called it fortune telling. It was just like some beliefs and practices that they had, like reading my palm, for example, that I just didn't ever think about, yeah, okay, my great aunt, read my palm or things like that. And so I started to get very curious and I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn about these, especially Slavic, Russian traditions, beliefs, practices. And then, of course, I mentioned the immigrant aspect. I'm very interested in immigrant communities, especially in history. Um, just because I relate to them. And I wanted to go to Paris. My husband said to me, we can go to Paris as long as you set a book in Paris. And I kind of look it up. Yeah, I
Mhm.
look it up and I'm like, oh my gosh, there was actually fortune tellers in the kind of Russian emigre community that was flourishing at the time in 1920s Paris, because a lot of people came over after the revolution and civil war in Russia. And so you had this very thriving immigrant community. And I'm like, done, let's go to Paris. I'll research it. I'll write the book. I mean, it just kind of really came together with these few kind of different sparks and it just worked. It was the only time that I've had that happen so quickly.
Really?
Yeah.
That everything came together
Yeah. Yeah. It
this
just
fast.
like it was just because I knew I wanted to write a fortune telling book. I knew I wanted to write about an immigrant because I wanted to kind of put so much of like myself into the book and my
Mhm.
parents and my experiences being an immigrant in the US. And, discovering this Russian community that I kind of knew about, but not really. And, you know, for me, the spark is really what do I want to learn about
Oh,
for a
yeah.
new book. And so it's okay, fortune telling, 1920s Paris, love the 1920s Paris vibe, jazz age Paris, the Paris of the Hemingways, the Lost Generation, Cole Porter, Midnight in Paris. I mean, what's better than that? And it was just a really fun book to think about and then eventually to write. It just all came together.
There's so much of what you were just saying that I want to delve into a little more deeply. So we'll start with this idea of Slavic folklore and superstition, which you
Hmm.
mentioned that most of your work kind of centers around in some way. Um,
Hmm.
what intrigues you about folklore in general, and then maybe very specifically Slavic folklore?
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe it's because I grew up with fairy tales and folklore. I grew up in a house where my grandfather was a professor. He was retired when I was little, and he would read to me and tell me about all kinds of historical, tidbits. And so I think I kind of just grew up on that steady diet of fairy tales, folklore. My grandmother, I realize only now, she passed away during COVID, and I keep kind of making these connections of how I'm not gonna say, but maybe like folkloric she was. I mean, she really did a lot of like, she grew herbs and she had a vegetable fruit garden. She, gave me a little necklace that is supposed to help in divination and answering questions you want answered if you hold it up in front of you. So it's just things that these connections that I made that are just so integral to like my family and the culture as a whole. I started realizing, I mean, just the superstitions that I've always lived with, don't talk about your baby. It's not good. It's bad luck. I mean, I've lived in these like parameters, and it wasn't really until I started writing, or maybe when I married my husband, and he's American, and he was just like, I can't believe you do that. Like, why can't we talk about our baby? Why can't we buy a crib before the baby's born? But it's superstitious to buy things for the baby before the baby's born. So it's things like that where I've been ruled by these superstitions all my life. And
Hmm.
so, in the culture specifically, the Slavic culture is very superstitious. I mean, you have this Orthodox element. You have, a lot of people are religious, a lot of people are Orthodox, but it's like paganism has continued to live alongside the religion. And you really see a lot of that where a lot of spells, a lot of beliefs, a lot of saints come from pagans. That's not unique in itself to Slavic culture, but I just feel like you really have this religious aspect to life, cultural life in Russia, for example. And then, of course, you also have this superstition and you live alongside it. And it's funny because I'll tell my mom all the time, I'm like, you know, uh, well, I'm afraid, to tell this person this because, it's bad, they kind of have the evil eye. Girl that kind of just like I'm like afraid because I feel like she like I just have this feeling that she has the evil eye, and my mom will be like, stop saying that the church does not believe in the evil eye, and then an hour later she'll be like, don't tell her about this. What it is like it's this weird like symbiotic like balance. And so I think that's why I'm interested in folklore, is that I've just always lived with it, and it was kind of a discovery that I wanted to write about it because I started contemporary fantasy. And then I kind of reached the fact that, oh, I actually want to write about my culture. I want to write about, supernatural stuff, maybe that's
Mhm.
influenced by my culture, by folklore, because that's how these ideas they become culture, right? They're influenced by different beliefs that people have held over time. And so I just find that very fascinating, and it's fun. Like it's fun to include that in a book and just have it be, unique and its own character and its own kind of identity where maybe people haven't, been familiar with those traditions and beliefs.
Yeah. Well, now, how did you make that discovery that you wanted to move from fantasy to the more speculative, gothic
Yeah.
way of your current writing?
Yeah. It took a while. I actually wrote a couple of books before I realized it. And honestly, I was reading a lot at the time. I was reading all kinds of books, historical fiction, fantasy, some horror, literary fiction. And I just remember this very clearly. I came into like a Barnes and Noble and I see Circe by Madeline Miller.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, was the retelling of the witch from the Odyssey, Circe. And I was just like so enamored of the cover. I was like, oh, this looks great. Like, and I started reading it and I started getting inspired. And I think I found that spark that was missing in my writing before, because I think before it was too vanilla. It didn't have anything unique in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out because I wasn't listening to myself. And I read that book and I said, well, I can do something like this. I want to with Baba Yaga, who's this Slavic witch, malign Slavic witch of legend. She's this hag that flies around in her, mortar and pestle, and is this ugly witch that has to have more to her than that. And so that's actually what started it. Is I realized I had to turn inwards and kind of I guess pay attention to that side of myself. And I found I was curious about that side of myself that I had never really been before. And I got interested in like Russian history and history in general. I was always loved history, loved historical fiction. So it kind of just, yeah, I kind of just came to it by just reading a lot and just being aware of what was coming out, what books were coming out, and I kind of yeah, went there.
Well, and there is also this very big historical piece to your work, in
Yes.
addition to the folkloric or speculative
Mhm.
elements. What draws you to including that historical element?
I think part of it is just a practical decision because I was a lawyer in my previous life. I practiced law. I was in litigation, and in litigation, it's you build a case. It's like a puzzle. It's putting together a puzzle piece of your story, of your client's story. that who you're representing. And so I found historical fiction just called to me because of its complexity. I found when I wrote the contemporary books that I had written that didn't go anywhere,
Mhm.
they didn't have that complexity that I really wanted, the building my case, building my story that I find in historical fiction you have to do because first of all, writing historical fiction is not a straightforward path because some of it you just kind of you piece together pieces of the past, and so I think that's what drew me to it. That it kind of used some of the skills that I remember as a lawyer, and so I think it was just very natural to me, and I avoided it because I was like, well, it's going to involve time and research, and I don't really want to do that. I'm burned out lawyer. Um, but in the end, I realized, okay, this is actually me. Why don't I accept this? Just kind of like the culture thing. Why don't I accept this part of myself as something I need in my writing? So that's kind of how I started writing it, and I love it. I love historical fiction. It's some of my first loves. I mean, I still remember some of my first loves of contemporary fiction. Philippa Gregory. I mean, everyone loves Philippa
Mhm.
Gregory, like the other Boleyn girl,
Mhm.
Alison Ware, like those, Diana Gabaldon, like all those authors that write wonderful historical fiction that I, have read from, the beginning when I came to this country and started reading in English. And so I think that was a huge part of it. And just historical fiction allows you to talk about the present, but in not as a direct way, I think. It allows you to kind
Mhm.
of cleverly cloak issues that we're thinking about. For example, with this story, immigration. I mean, that was a really important issue for me to talk about here, women in immigration specifically, owning their own business. And I felt that was, to answer your previous question too, I felt that was more appropriate to the Gothic genre because
Mhm.
you're looking at some of these darker issues, more realistic issues, more true to life issues, and you're talking about real people, real places. And I feel like that calls to me more than like high fantasy, which I feel that, it's fun to read for me, but it's just something that I think I can like speak to more is
Mhm.
writing kind of these more speculative books about real people, real women, and their survival and their stories. And I think that's a lot of fun.
The specific time period of the early 1920s is where we are in The Fortune Tellers of Rue Daru and also The Haunting of Moscow House, your
Yes,
previous book.
yes.
What is it about that particular time that calls to you?
I think uh it was a time of such change for the entire world.
Mhm.
Um and I think, you have the Russian Revolution, which was 1917. You have this very bloody civil war that happened. And then, of course, you had the Great War,
Mhm.
the World War One of 1914 that lasted into 1918. That was really just chaotic and life-changing for that generation, for the entire world. And we're talking about Russia and we're talking about France as well. That was
Mhm.
obviously occupied. And so I think it just attracts me because it was such a time of change and a time of like almost newness. I think that's why you had the Roaring Twenties, right? People wanted to live. And I think in both these books, I do talk about and touch on the background that kind
Mhm.
of led the characters to where they are, but I also talk about these young women that, they are growing up, they're in their 20s. Life goes on like it frequently does in times of war or after war. And I just love that. I love that concept of kind of um, you have trauma of the past, you have this haunted past, either family or personal, or frequently both, and you have to live. So then, you see these women just going out and enjoying, enjoying the town, going out on the town, going out to the cafes in Paris with their friends, and falling in love and having relationships. And I think just growing as women. And I love that kind of placing women in very complicated times, where it is hard, but you still have to live. And so that's just very, I don't know, I just think that's very inspiring for me.
Yeah, let me find it here. You have said, uh, we women carry the brunt of survival on our shoulders, in immigration or not, in the 1920s or in contemporary life. And I have been lucky to be surrounded by strong women. In some form or other, they now live on the pages of this novel.
Mhm.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so many women in this novel were inspired by my family. I set out writing this novel. I wanted to write a multi-generational tale, and I wasn't quite sure who I'd be writing about. I knew I wanted a young woman, and I knew I wanted, maybe a mother, maybe an aunt, maybe a sister, maybe a grandmother. And I'm very lucky that we have very strong women in our family, very strong women who just kind of they work, they take care of kids, they're great moms, great grandmothers, great sisters. And they're just very inspiring women. My grandmother was a professor, my other grandmother was a doctor. It's women that they help other women, not only the family members, me, but just other women. I still remember my grandmother, who Baba Valia, the grandmother in this book, is based on actually. I
Oh,
still remember her helping the entire community of women with their medical issues. People would come to her with, back pain or waist pain or whatever it was. And she was a pediatrician. And of course, many would come with their kids. And just seeing the effect they had on their family, their community, their marriages, it was and is continues to be a very inspiring thing for me. And so you definitely have all the women I know in this story, and specifically, of course, Baba Valia. I wasn't, I was going to have a grandmother, but she was going to be very minor, and she just jumped off the page. And I think it happened because my grandmother was like that. She was bold, she was beautiful, she was smart, she was a strong personality. And I think she was very much inspired by my grandmother. And I think that's why she just made so much sense to me right away. I mean, I really didn't need to work on her character much at all because she just made sense. And her relationship with Zena, my main character, is one inspired by us. We were always very close. But I also wanted to kind of talk about that, generational gap that you have. And, there were things that my grandmother could not understand, did not understand. And that was okay. She still loved me and I loved her. And that's what you see, this very playful give and take, this playful relationship that I had with my grandmother.
mhm.
And I do want to get at one more thing that I think is very, very important. It's the secret keeping,
Ah,
which is a very endemic to that generation. I feel like I found out many secrets from my grandparents that I did not know, that I found out only after they passed away. Big secrets.
wow.
And I think that was the culture. It was starting in, Imperial Russia, where you had a very conservative society. And then, of course, it changed to Soviet regime, and you had a very secretive society
Mhm.
where secrets started to be to be currency, essentially of survival. And so you had secret keeping as a very important aspect of that generation. And I really wanted to get at that with Baba Valia, the grandmother, keeping secrets from her granddaughter, thinking she needs to protect her, and
Mhm.
thinking that these secrets are too dangerous for her granddaughter to know. And plus, she just did not want to know. She did not want her granddaughter to think any less of her. And
Mhm.
so I think that's a very important aspect of my relationship with my grandparents that I really infused into this book as well.
Yes, yes, I can really see that. And I hadn't really thought of it in that way, but that concept of secrets as currency,
Hmm.
and especially
Yeah.
in this particular culture.
Yeah. They were very
Um,
dangerous times.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, mhm. Yeah.
Another huge aspect of the novel that we've already touched on a couple of times is immigration.
Yes.
We have this ghost story, we have the murder mystery, we have this wonderful historical jazz age Paris setting, but there is this heart of the story that
Mhm.
is very much centering on immigration. So, can you talk about that a little bit more and your decision to want to talk about that and how that comes out in the novel?
Yeah, well, yeah, when I decided I was writing a book in Paris, I wanted it to be an immigration story because my first two books were set in Russia.
Mm.
And I feel like this is almost so much closer to me as a person just because I am an immigrant. You know, I came over to the US when I was 8 years old. So I've been here most of my life. And I think that really influenced, okay, I need to write an immigrant story, but I wanted to do it in a different time and place. So, you know, therefore, Paris. I wanted to visit Paris. I wanted to do research in Paris. I discovered this thriving community of immigrants, emigres in Paris. And it just kind of came together and made sense. And so much of what I experienced as an immigrant, what I remember my parents experiencing, I mean, they have their own business too. And so having Baba Vale and Zina have their fortune telling slash tea room business
Mhm.
was, you know, just something that I know, you know, because I see my parents go through it day by day. And Zena in particular is very interesting because she's French. She was born in Paris, but she's always been surrounded by this emigre community.
Mhm.
And the reason that I did that is because that was essentially my story is even though we were in the US, in the Chicago area, we were living in an area of Chicago that had a lot of immigrants, especially Slavic immigrants, Russian immigrants. And so I was always pretty much before I went to college, I was surrounded by Russians.
Mhm.
Sometimes I didn't even like we went to the Russian grocery store. I went to a Russian music school, Russian doctors. You know, it was all Russian. And Zena has the same, where she's growing. She's supposed to be in Paris. She is in Paris, but it's surrounded by people from the old country. And that feeling you get that you're not quite in Paris, you're not quite in Russia, and then you
Mhm.
don't quite belong to either culture. And
Mhm.
I feel that even today, I don't feel quite American and I don't feel quite Russian. When I'm there, you know, well, first, you know, it's a little like, oh, you're American. Hmm. You know, it's definitely a lot of that.
Mhm.
But it's also just I can't fully I guess relate to
Mhm.
Russians, and of course I can't fully relate to Americans. Though it has helped being married to an American. I actually feel more American than ever being married to an American. But it's still that those feelings of belonging, and that's why I think Zena really builds her found family around herself throughout the book
Mhm.
because it's that feeling of belonging that all immigrants are after. All of us immigrants are after belonging. And I think that's the heart of the novel.
Yeah. What was your research process like for this book? We've also talked about wanting to go to Paris and then getting to go to
Yes.
Paris, doing the research in Paris. So what did that look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was just a lot of fun. When by the time I went to Paris, I actually did some research before. So I did some research on fortune telling. I love surveys. I love surveys. I love a good survey. And I found a couple that were amazing on fortune telling and spiritualism. So they really went through the history of especially Slavic fortune telling. I can't believe there's a book on that, but there is.
Wow.
It's through Cambridge. And so I love like finding good sources that, you know, I can really get a good history of something. So spiritualism is the same. I found this excellent history of seances and spiritualism. So that was awesome. And then, of course, the Russian emigre community in Paris. Helen Rappaport is an amazing, very knowledgeable British historian.
Mhm.
And she wrote a book that was like after the Romanovs, exiles, Russian exiles in Paris from the Belle Epoque to around World War II. That source was amazing. It really just went through, and she has a brilliant way of making nonfiction feel very accessible. It's like you're reading a story, a novel, and so using that source as well as kind of the source to the emigre community,
Mm.
and of course 1920s Paris as well. So it was a lot of different pieces of research and finding kind of the right sources to kind of give me a very broad and detailed overview. um, and so I had read a lot before I went to Paris. So I kind of like had a list of places that I could visit. And, the place to really talk about is Rue de Rue, which
Mm.
was the street that has the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral as it is still the main Russian Orthodox cathedral in Paris. And I went inside and actually talked to the father there and had a really good conversation with him about kind of Russian emigres, and that these people, a lot of them do still live there and have, I mean, they're French, they're assimilated French now, but of course they have their ancestors who came over from Russia, and he knows many people like that with roots, the Russian roots, and who came over after the revolution. So you can still see echoes of this community around Rue de Rue. You have a Russian restaurants, Russian street names. It's very cool, and it was very cool to see all that and walk the streets that my emigres would walk. And so that was really just a very cool aspect. And of course, just experiencing everything Paris has to offer was awesome. And seeing all the art and architecture and trying the food. I went to all the 1920s haunts, so that was awesome. Some of the cafes that Hemingway and his Lost Generation crew would frequent. I went there, and they are as amazing and magical as you might expect. So it was just a really inspiring trip, and just got me so inspired to write the story. And yeah, and after that, I do want to mention one more thing. Going from sort of these secondary sources to primary sources to reading who else talked about the Russian emigre community in their own words, but writers and immigration that came over from Russia, like Nina Berberova, who's actually a character in the book, Tefi. She was another Russian author who lived in Paris, and they have a lot of biographies, memoirs, short stories, novels about life. What was life in Paris like for a Russian immigrant in the 1920s? So it was such fun research, so rich and different. You have magic, you have history, and it was just very cool research. Yeah.
What is your full process like? So you start out with, so you get an idea, and
Mhm.
it sounds like you start out gathering all of this research
Mhm.
sort of around this idea. And then how long does that research period last? And at what point are you starting to write? And then how do you go from there? What does it look like for you?
It is takes forever. It is endless. The research is endless. No, I'll do a few books, some online research in the beginning when I'm kind of idea generation phase to kind of get the lay of the land. And then I'll kind of do just a lot of brainstorming, a lot of thinking. That might take like up to a year, depending on how
Mm.
much time I have. But I'll usually start an idea, and then it's at least 6 months before I put kind of pen to paper. And I'm just thinking about it. I talk to my husband a lot just because he knows storytelling really well. And we just kind of talk through story ideas. And then I have like a general story idea in my head. And I'll usually have a couple before I choose the one. And it depends how much I have on the one. And that's usually the one where it just makes the most sense to me. It comes together the fastest, which this story, as I mentioned previously, it just came together very well. And I haven't had that before, and I haven't had that since. So
Wow.
there you go. But yeah, actually, I'll start with, some of my process is dictated by the publishing process. As a returning author to a publisher, a big five publisher,
Hmm.
you have to do a proposal. And so that includes like basically a query pitch, a synopsis, which is a summary from the beginning to the end of your book. And then you have the first couple of chapters. And so I've actually gotten used to that process and I love it now because it
Hmm.
really forces me to think about the entire book, to plan it out. And I'm definitely a plotter. So I'll, have all of this preparation, have some research done. And then I sort of, do a chapter by chapter outline that is not detailed by any means, couple sentences for each chapter. I'm very much of the mindset that I give myself full license to do whatever I want once I start writing.
Hmm.
I have an idea of where I'm going, and sometimes it's not the way that I planned it out, and that's okay. And I've learned to be okay with that. And I think it makes it fun for the reader because they don't really expect what's going to happen. And it makes it fun for me as the writer because nothing is set in stone. But what it does allow me to do is get my story and my characters known to me. And from then on, I can make it better. And I do make it better through the writing process. And so it's a very, for me, a very active process. And, in terms of writing, usually like 3, 4 months of active drafting
Hmm.
is usually how long it takes. And then from then on, a few months of edits, and then usually turn it into my editor. So that's kind of my process. It's really,
It
um,
feels very refined. I don't know if that's what you were about to about to say, but it feels very refined to me.
each book, it has become more refined. It's kind of like, okay, well, it's time for this. Now it's time for this. And again, part of that is being dictated by the publishing process of, okay, my editor has my book now. I have a little time. It's time to get a new idea going. Okay, my editor got back to me with edits. I have to work on edits now. So it's definitely dictated by the publisher and the editor, and yeah, what kind of where we are in the publishing process that I can work on something new. Um, yeah.
Do you have a daily writing routine? Are
I
you
do, yeah.
specific times that you're at your desk? What does that look like?
I definitely do. I'm very much, I mean, I'm lucky that right now writing is all I'm doing next to being a mom of two very rambunctious, one toddler, one year old.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so I have to be very focused when, I have some help. So I'm usually like a 9 to 4, 9 to 3. 3, I pick up my daughter, have lunch, and pretty much from there, I'm with my kids the rest of the night. I'm not good at working at night or early mornings. I'm very much used to kind of the 9 to 5 routine of being a lawyer, I guess.
Mhm.
Not that I work 9 to 5 by any means, but I'm used to that kind of work hours are for like daylight. And so I'm the best at like 10 to 2. That's like my best hours. I get it done. And then I'm sort of doing emails and other stuff like that. So,
So 10 to 2
yeah,
is the writing time. And
it's
then
the writing
everything
time,
else.
it's the writing, it's the editing time, it's whatever kind of I'm doing. Like right now I'm working on a new book, so I've started drafting. So that's been really hard because you have to combine it with the publicity and marketing of your previous book. So this one is going through the publicity and marketing. So
Mhm.
we're going to end our call and then I'm going to kind of get to the edits of this chapter that I wrote last week. So it's a little start stop, which is really tough. I'm very good with kind of being focused, get it done, get it drafted. But when you're promoting a book, you can't really do that. So I kind of just try to find the time that I can, and usually that's right now, and probably till 3 or 4, however much time I have.
Have you always written in some capacity?
um, yes, kind of. So I actually, when we came over to the States, I didn't know English, and so I learned English by watching Nick at Night. I Love Lucy reruns, Bewitched reruns, and reading. That's when I really started to read, is as soon as I had some knowledge of English, I started to read because I realized that my English was getting better when I read. And
Wow.
so that's how I started to become a good reader, just beside it was a family thing for sure. Books were always in my family. Having a professor grandfather who read to me Pushkin, Dostoevsky, Gogol, all the Russian classics he read to me. So it was in my blood. It was what I remember ever since I can remember him. Have any memories? It was always with a book, and it was always him or my mom or grandma reading to me. And so stories have been in my life since ever since I can remember. And the writing came really when I just started to be good at, English. Like I was very bad at math and very bad at science, but I was very good at English and reading and all of that literature. Like it just came, not easy because it was very hard for me, but it was like a natural, like it just naturally called to me and I loved it. And I was like an AP English and got an award. And then I was like, you know what? That's what I want to do. I want to become an English major. And I did. So I majored in English writing, rhetoric, and political science as well. So that's why I really like politics in all my books too. Some politics and history. So that comes from that. And then yeah, and I started my first book actually right out of college.
Wow.
Because yeah, it was 2008 and I couldn't find a job.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'm going to start a book. I can do this. And then I didn't know how to write a book. So I wrote like 150 pages or something. And I was like, yeah, I don't know how to do this. Yeah, I'm going to go to law school instead.
As one
And
does.
as one, look, I was the daughter of immigrants. You
Yeah.
can't forget. My
Mhm.
parents literally told me and my sister, doctor or lawyer. My sister's still a doctor. You
Well,
know,
how
uh,
did you then make the switch? So you were a
oh
practicing
God,
lawyer,
I was. Yeah,
and
I
now
practiced almost
you're
20 years,
not.
and now I'm not. Yeah. No, it was so I actually, fast forward, went to Northwestern Law, great law school, got a great law firm job, and it wasn't for me. I just realized it was not for me at all. Not only was the lifestyle is very hard in a large law firm. It was it's not that I didn't enjoy all of it because I enjoyed so much of it. I
Mm,
enjoyed the writing part. I loved when I was writing. I was
mm,
writing briefs or like little summaries on the research I was doing. That's where I was living. And I realized I missed the creative process. I missed creating something.
mm.
And so my husband, we had just gotten married, and he said, "You are miserable. Like, why don't you do something you like? Like, on a weekend or something. Do something for yourself that you like." And I started to write because he said, you should give this a shot. It's cool. It's, like
Mhm.
storytelling. You might learn from it. I was like, yeah, okay, all right. I'll sell, So that's how I actually started working on that book that I started 10 years before. I was like, I wonder if I can finish it. And it was the only thing that year that made me happy. That last year at the law firm, it was the only thing that made me happy is writing at lunch, in the evenings, on the weekends. And after I finished that book, I said to myself, I can do this. I can finish a book. I love the process. Saved up some money. I'm going to see where this takes me. And I took this huge risk and I quit because I hated it so much.
Mhm.
It was very taking a big, I mean, in reality, it was taking a big toll on my health and mental health. And I knew that I didn't know if I would survive if I would stay in the law.
Mhm.
And so I was like, you know what, I'll take a little break. I'll take a little break. I've known people that did that, known lawyers that did that. And a break turned into a few years where I kind of really just worked on writing. I wrote a couple books. And I gotta say, without a support system, that wouldn't have been possible. That was very privileged and very very the encouragement more than anything else, which my parents, my husband encouraged me to do this.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then I got my first deal after I wrote The Witch and the Tsar, which became my debut. So it was
What was that process? How did that happen? What was the road to publication?
so I had written a couple books. It didn't really go anywhere. I was, doing this stuff full time, so I was really learning about marketing, about the industry, about agents and how all that worked. I did submit that first book that I wrote 10 years before.
Hmm.
Got a couple bites, people asked for the full manuscript, but it just didn't really go anywhere. So I
Mm.
read a second book. The second book I knew wouldn't go anywhere. Like I had a feeling it just wasn't the right for the market. It just wasn't the right the next submission. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna force myself to finish this because I'm gonna learn from this book. And that book actually taught me a lot about character development. So I'm
Hmm.
really glad I wrote that book. So no time is wasted just for aspiring writers or writers out there. Really, nothing is wasted. You learn from everything. And the third book was, inspired by Circe. And that came together kind of very quickly as well. Um, I wrote that book. I edited that book over a few year time span. I think it took a couple years. And then I submitted it to like 20 agents. I mean, before that, I was submitted to like 100 agents. I mean, that's fine if you want to do that, but the right book, it's very interesting how it works because I submitted it within 2 weeks. I had two offers. One was Jennifer Welts, my agent, who actually she's gonna laugh, but she actually did not give me the time of day for my first book. I submitted it to her. It's really so that's why it's not personal. If
Mm.
you're getting a no, that doesn't mean that you will always get a no even from that person, because this is the prime example of I got out of the slush pile. First time, I didn't even get an answer from her, didn't even get like a request for more pages. And here she was just requesting within 2 weeks. I had that offer and I had accepted. And from then on, we edited with Jennifer. So with my agent, I edited the book again several times. I think it took about 9 months to prepare it.
Mm.
I gave birth to my first baby and we went on submission. That was very stressful,
Oh,
by the way. I don't recommend.
sounds like it.
And then I think it took about 6 months to get my deal, and then I've been with my publisher Berkeley ever since.
What a great story. Um, but also, so was it a multiple book
It
deal?
was, yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah. The first book, Witch and the Tsar and the Haunting of Moscow House, was one contract, so it was a two-book deal, and then this third one was my first one, actually going through the process of pitching her a new idea, doing the proposal, and then I'm kind of in that right now too. So praying for the best, keeping my fingers crossed. I'm keeping this dream alive and going. That's what I always tell fellow writers and people that want to write. It takes so much tenacity. It takes so much hard work and survival. Really, I mean, you can live the dream, but you still have to keep holding on to the dream, and that's kind of what I'm doing. I still love it, but yeah, it's definitely a tough industry. It's a tough job, and you have to really love it and be passionate and work hard like everywhere else.
Mm. What do you know now that you wish you had known before publishing your first book?
um I think I would just know that things change very quickly, and to not get hung up on small things. I'm still reminding myself of that actually. But yeah, I would think, oh, I didn't get this answer from an agent. My book is horrible, or
Mm.
oh, I'm not getting a great result with this book. I shouldn't be a writer, and that's not the case at all. It just might take a little while. It might take you a while to write the right book for the right agent and for the right publisher. I mean, I still have friends that have agents, but they unfortunately haven't been able to get the publishing deal yet. And they just kind of keep going. And I think that's what that's what I think I would say is that, and even when you get the deal, you're
Mhm.
still kind of fighting for the next deal. You're fighting to write that book. So it's I think I think as a writer, it's just very easy to get hung up on the good and bad small things that happen. Like, oh, I got this deal, I'm set.
Mhm.
I remember thinking, when I got my first deal, like, oh, great. Like, I'm going to be a writer for life now. And that's not the case. Sometimes you have to go back to a day job. Sometimes you have to kind of get a little creative. When I had kids, okay, my time has changed. I'm now kind of half doing the momming, half the writing.
Mm.
And, it's just things change and don't get hung up on it. Just keep going. That's what I tell myself every day is that you just have to keep going and, not pay attention to the little things, not pay attention to minor setbacks or big setbacks. I have a friend who I love very much, and she lost her publisher, and she's with a new publisher and is very happy. And it's not the end, is what I'm saying. It's never the end if this is what you love and this is what you want to do and you want to write that next book.
Do you have a favorite piece of advice for aspiring authors who are trying to publish and haven't gotten there yet?
Um, well, I think curiosity
Mm.
is definitely one where you're constantly learning. And then that's what I have to do, even when you're published, in order to write a better book the next time, in order to write a book that maybe resonates more with your audience, with your readers. You have to be learning. And learning takes a lot of curiosity. I'm always curious. I'm always reading, writing books. For example, I just read Save the Cat, which I've never read before, but that's a writing book that I had never read before that I was curious about. Every of my novels starts with curiosity. What do I want to learn about? This time frame, these people, this history. What do I want to know? And I think having that curiosity, it makes you learn from book to book, and it makes you learn, I think, as a writer.
Mhm.
Um, Not only, hey, what sells, but you're learning about your craft. You're learning about yourself. What, like this book fits me much better than my first two books because I think I'm improving. I'm asking those questions of myself, that curiosity towards everything, the craft, the industry, yourself. What is something that I know that I can write about? And it's not the write what you know adage, but it's going deep into your writing and into writing something about that matters to you. And it will matter to others. And I think taking that passion for whatever that is, and then just working hard. I mean, the tenacity that you need to just keep going. As I said, there will be minor setbacks, even when you're published, before you're published. Throughout this whole process, there are setbacks, and you just kind of have to take it with grace, humility, and keep working. Keep asking those questions, keep being curious, and just keep loving it. I think that's really, we all love it. The people that are still in it love it. And I think if you love it, then you're going to go far.
That's great. Stay curious.
Stay curious.
We have a traditional last question on the podcast, and it is, when the Fortune Tellers of Rue de Rue is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Honestly, it's basically the entire soundtrack to Midnight in Paris. Like everything,
Excellent.
every song in that movie is like I literally listened to it on repeat when I wrote this book. So I'd say like any song from that movie. There is one that I always think about and always play like on my Instagram posts when I'm posting about the book. And that it's called Little French Bistro by Dan Newton. It just sounds so French. Like go
Mm.
and listen to it because it just sounds French. It seems kind of jaunty and very 1920s jazz age, very like, oh, I can, see Hemingway and Hadley, his first wife, like in that cafe, like they're, having some drinks. And it just reminds me of the heart of Paris, the heart of 1920s Paris. And I love it so much.
Oh, love it. Love it. I can hear it now in the background of the movie. I'm picturing it on the screen. Olesya Salnikova Gilmore, thank you so, so much for being here
Thank,
today. It's been wonderful getting to talk to you.
thank you very much for having me. This has been such a blast. And you had amazing questions. It's an amazing show. So thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.